Season 2, Episode 3, Blood on the Blade. We open with the barn and we can see Keith is still hanging off the roof, but now he's one of the reanimated. We see two guys cut the rope and a reanimated Keith is on the ground, now growling at them. We get the reveal that it's Chris and his men who have found him like this. Chris then pulls out his knife and puts it directly through his skull. Chris then says, "Poor bastard." He laughs and then looks back at his men and he says, I mean, he didn't even have a chance, did he? I should have seen that one coming. Every time I leave Gary in charge, shit like this always happens. One of his men asks, "You think this is the doing of the new folks?" Chris says, "It crossed my mind." Chris then puts his boot over the reanimated Keith's head and starts stomping his head in over and over again until the blood starts pouring out of his head and all over the ground. Then Chris starts walking to his truck and says to his men, "Take what you want and let's get the fuck out of here." One of his guys takes Keith's jacket and then Chris and his men all get into the truck before the deadheads up the road get to them. Lincoln would say to Blake, "I knew these people were some sick bastards, but this is one fucked up collection they've got going here." Blake asks, "So what do we do?" Lincoln then hears the men walking down the hall and looking for them, so he quickly says to Blake, "All right, we're gonna get through these and go out the exit back there. You ready?" Blake says, "It's just a few kills each. We'll be fine." Lincoln and Blake start stabbing these deadheads. Lincoln uses his knife and stabs one after another in a hurry. Blake uses the other side of his gun and starts smashing their heads in. They are getting ever closer to the exit. The men are still in the halls looking for them, and they sound like they are getting closer. Lincoln and Blake keep stabbing and smashing these deadheads' faces in, and then they reach the exit, but the door won't open. Lincoln, in a panic, keeps trying, but the door just won't open. Lincoln then starts kicking the door in. Then with all this noise, the men hear them. Lincoln is trying to kick the door in, but then Blake says, "Lincoln?" They see the men come in from the other door that they came in, and then the men see them from a distance trying to get through the exit door. But then suddenly, Lincoln finally kicks the door in. The men start shooting at Lincoln and Blake as they run out the exit door, but the men are not able to kill Lincoln and Blake. After Lincoln and Blake quickly close the door behind them, they continue to run through the halls and look for Tom and Joel. Gary would be roaming the halls with a few other men with guns and would tell them, "If Lincoln wants to play hardball, I'm his man. These fucking people are goddamn animals." He then tells his men, "You find Lincoln, you kill him no matter what. Do not let that man leave this factory alive." Flashback, 2 days after the season 1 finale. We see a hand covered with scars, and we see it's Tom sitting in his new backyard at the suburban estates. We see Sydney and Emma must be the next house over because Sydney is out cleaning her backyard and she sees Tom wrapping his hand. Sydney asks, "You need some help with that?" Tom says, "Nah, I almost got it." Sydney laughs and she says, "It doesn't look like it." Tom would say, "Oh yeah, what do you know there, genius?" Sydney would say, "Hang on, I'll be right over." Sydney would come next door and Sydney would start laughing and Tom would say, "I know, I did a shit job." Sydney would say, no, it's, yeah, just let me." And she would start patching up his hand and they would talk as she helps him. "So how you been doing?" Tom would say, "Fine, I guess." Sydney would say, "You sure? I never see you. And Lincoln's worried about you." Tom says, "Well, my door's always open, so if the guy wants to talk, he can." Sydney says, "Yeah, but shouldn't be just him doing all of that. I mean, Lincoln should know you're still here." Tom wouldn't say anything, and then Sydney would know, and she would say, "You still want to find him, don't you?" Tom says, "The bastard isn't dead." Sydney looks at him and says, I get it. I can help you finish this thing with Dave." Sydney finishes wrapping up his hand, and Tom would say, "Look, I appreciate your concern. You win, Lincoln. But this was Billy's fight, and I'm gonna finish it for him." Tom would get up and walk away. Sydney looked sad for him, and she would walk back over to her house, and Tom would say, "Thanks." We would see Tom have a small smile on his face. Currently. Then, we would slowly transition to Tom in the current timeline, and he's locked up inside of a cell, and he looks scared because he's all alone and he doesn't know where Lincoln is. He then hears the sound of gunshots being fired, and Tom can't do anything but just sit there and wait for it to hopefully end, because he's locked in the cell. Dave and his men are walking back to their camp. Sydney and Emma's hands are tied up, and they're walking down the road. Sydney asks, "So how did you survive?" Dave says, "Well, your fucking crazy friend almost pushed me to my end," meaning Tom. "But I lived. I found people that needed someone like me." Sydney says, "Someone like you, huh?" Dave says, "Oh yeah, I'm sure Lincoln's a great leader. How's that prick doing anyway?" Sydney says, "None of your business is how he's doing." Dave would laugh, and then one of his men would say, "Dave, we'll have to stop for the night. We won't make it back home until way after nightfall." Dave says, "All right, we'll find a place for the night."
Please put me to bed and turn down the light.
They slowly head into this tunnel, and one of Dave's men hears the sound of growling down the other end of the tunnel. Dave and his men move in slowly as they take Sydney and Emma with them. One of Dave's men says, "It doesn't sound like many of them. We can probably take them out, no problem." Dave says, "All right, let's do this carefully." They all pull out their guns, and then the dead start coming at them.
Lay down next to me. Don't listen when
All of Dave's men start shooting at the dead at the same time with machine guns. Sydney and Emma, who are still tied up, are standing back and watching them take out the dead. Once they're done, Dave starts laughing, and Sydney looks at him and she says, "You really enjoy this, don't you?" Weird fuck. Dave would try to stop laughing and say, "What? You're telling me you never had this much fun taking out the dead?" Sydney says, "No, but you do. You fit right into this world, that's for damn sure." And Dave would walk away from them and go to his men and say, "Take out the bodies, this will be our place for the night." Back at the factory, Lincoln and Blake are quickly walking down this hall. They then discover some jail cells, but they are all empty. Then suddenly, Tom is revealed to be in one of them, and we see Lincoln and Blake find Tom in the cell. Lincoln looks happy to see Tom is alright, but he's very much in a hurry because he hears Gary and his men are not too far away, and he needs to get Tom out of the cell. Lincoln quickly tries to unlock the cell door with the set of keys that he took from the dead man. He tries the first key and it doesn't open the door. "Son of a bitch!" Blake says, "Try the other one." Tom says, "Don't get killed because of me. Go while you still can." Lincoln says, "Alright, let's try the other one." He tries the other and the only other key, and it also doesn't work. And then they hear down the hall Gary, who says, "Lincoln, is that you?" Lincoln is desperately hurrying up and trying to get the door to unlock. Tom keeps saying, "Just leave me, man." Gary says, "I know you're somewhere down here." And as Tom says, "Get out of here," the door unlocks. Tom rushes out of the cell door. Lincoln, Tom, and Blake start running down the hall and they hear Gary say, "Lincoln, you're a dead man walking." Lincoln, Tom, and Blake would be trying to find Joel. They then run down the bottom floor and go down this huge set of stairs. As they are going down the stairs, they hear someone screaming out in pain. Lincoln, Tom, and Blake go down the bottom floor and they open the first door to their left and they find Joel with a bag on his head about to be tortured by one of Chris's men, and the man turns around with a knife in his hand. He then notices Lincoln, Tom, and Blake standing at the door, and Lincoln is pointing a machine gun at him and he says, "Step the fuck away from them." The man would laugh and he would say, "This is our world now. You're always gonna kill, but people like you haven't gotten their hands dirty before, and you're not about to do it now." And then Lincoln would shoot him right in the heart and the man would fall. Blake would then rush to Joel and then he would take the bag off his head and he would ask, "Are you okay? Did he hurt you at all?" Joel would say, "No, I'm fine." And Blake would know he's lying because he has a big cut on his leg. Blake would look at it and he would say to Lincoln, "We need to get out of here." Lincoln would be still holding his gun and he would say, "Yeah, Tom, can you check out the door to make sure it's clear?" Tom would look out the hall and he would hear men far down the hall, and Tom would tell Lincoln, "It's time to go. They're coming." Lincoln would look back at the slaughterhouse that they're in and say, "Blake, get Joel and let's go." They run through the halls and they are trying to find their way out, and Lincoln says to Tom, Blake, and Joel as he points to the exit down the hall, "There." They then run to the door and quickly exit the building. They then are outside the factory building, but they need to find their way outside the walls. They then run through the front yard, and they are trying to find their way over the fence. We then see a sniper on the roof of the factory building, aiming an AK-47 at Lincoln, Tom, Blake, and Joel from a distance. Tom points towards the fence where they can try to make a run for it and get out. Tom says, "We run and we jump over the fence and we go." Lincoln agrees and looks at Blake and Joel and says, "It's the only way we get out." Tom asks Joel, "Can you run, kid?" Joel says, Yeah, I can." Blake asks him if he's sure, but then they start getting shot at by the sniper on the roof. Lincoln and the others run for the fence, and Tom tells them as they're running to run side to side so they can't shoot them. The sniper misses a few shots and reloads. Lincoln and the others are running for their lives, and then they make it to the fence. Lincoln quickly hops over the fence. Tom follows and makes it over the fence. Then Blake goes over, and finally Joel. As Joel climbs up the fence, he gets shot in the head as he's looking at Blake in the eyes on the other side of the fence. Joel is killed and falls off the fence and to the ground. Blake screams, "No." We see the sniper reloading his gun with a grin on his face. The sniper is getting ready to shoot Lincoln, Tom, and Blake next, but as we see Blake screaming and crying for Joel, Lincoln whispers to Tom, "We gotta go." Tom nods and pulls on Blake's shirt and says, "We gotta go, son." And Blake quickly gets up and off the ground as Tom is picking him up, and then Lincoln, Tom, and Blake rush away from the fence and away from the factory before the sniper kills them too. Dave and his men are back on the road, and the sun is about to rise. One of the men says, "We'll be there by sunrise, sir." Dave says, "Sounds good." He looks at Sydney and Emma and says to Sydney, "You can keep running your mouth. You can bitch, you can complain, or you can shut the fuck up and watch. It really doesn't matter to me." Sydney wouldn't say anything, and Dave would say, "You know this is how it is. You either do as I say, or I'll cut your goddamn head off and I'll personally deliver it to Lincoln. Your choice." Then before Sydney responds, one of Dave's men finds a car on the side of the road. They check it and they notice that it has a quarter tank of gas, and Dave says, "We can make it back home on that, gentlemen." So they all stuff themselves in this car and ride back to Dave's place.
Please put me to bed and turn down the light.
We then see them pull up to the gates of Dave's camp, and we can see he and his men are set up in a military base outside of the city of Washington, D.C. Dave steps out of the car and talks to his men that say, "Glad you're back, boss." Then the guard notices Sydney and Emma in the back of the car, and the guard would ask, "Who the hell is that?" Dave would say, "Open the gates, boys. We've got some things to talk about." Back at the suburban estates. Wesley is in his office in his house, and he's cleaning his gun. He then puts it together, and then he hears a knock at his door. Wesley points the gun at the door. The door opens, and we see it's Luke. Wesley says, "It's almost midnight, you stupid fuck." Luke says, "Sorry, boss. I just figured I'd check in and see how you're doing. I never see you." Wesley says, "You should get some rest, soldier." Luke says, I just want to make sure you're... Wesley yells, I said I'm fine, goddammit! Luke would back up and he would say, all right, I'll leave if you promise to get out of your house more. I'm just a little worried about you, man, that's all. Wesley, in a sarcastic manner, says, well, I really appreciate you looking out for your boss. And Luke would start walking out and Wesley says, hopefully you will live long enough to do that. Luke would look freaked out and he would leave. Wesley aims the gun at the door and looks like he wants to kill Luke, but he doesn't. We see Haley is fast asleep, but she is woken up by a very loud knock on her door. Luke is at her door. Haley opens up the door and he says, oh my god, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were asleep. She interrupts and says, oh no, it's fine, but what's wrong with you? Luke looks a bit freaked out and he says, look, with Lincoln and Tom gone and Mark and James being on guard, I didn't know who to go to. Haley says, yeah. Luke says, Wesley threatened to kill me. Haley says, well, I mean, I know he's been a little unstable lately, but this is something we should talk to Lincoln about when he gets back. Luke says, yeah, but he's the one in charge, not Lincoln. Haley looks like she wants to say more, but then they hear at the wall Mark, who's on guard, saying, they're back! Haley's face lights up and Luke and Haley start running towards the front gate. Lincoln, Tom, and Blake walk in. Lincoln looks out of breath and Haley, Luke, and a bunch of other residents run up to him. Haley hugs him tight and asks, are you okay? Lincoln doesn't answer the question and looks at everyone standing in front of him and says, in an angered manner, where the fuck is Wesley? Luke looks at Blake and asks, who the hell is that? Lincoln doesn't answer and yells out, come on, Wesley! Come on out, man! You say you're this brilliant leader? That you kept this place together? Well, I got a new challenge for you, buddy. Haley says, babe, stop. Lincoln says, no, man. You claim you're this big hero, meanwhile you sent me and Tom on the supply run and we damn near almost got killed making it back? Luke interrupts him. Lincoln, what's going on? Lincoln takes a breath and looks back at Haley and then looks back at the group and says, me and Tom went out for supplies and instead, we found something that we didn't want to ever find. And I'm afraid that kind of group that we've always tried to avoid is here. Luke asks, what is that supposed to mean, Lincoln? Lincoln continues, when me and Tom were out there, we encountered men that brutally executed people and would decapitate them afterwards. Afterwards, me and Tom got taken by these men and brought to their settlement. Haley asks, wait, you were in this place? Tom says, oh, not only were we inside, we killed a shit ton of them. But then we escaped, Lincoln says. And that's when we met Blake and his friend Joel. Joel didn't make it. But Blake is here to help, and we will let him help us. Luke would cross his arms and say, I'm afraid that's not your call to make. Lincoln says, well, as long as I'm standing right here right now and giving you people the warning that you deserve, I think I have a say in this. A random man from the crowd would ask, so what's your point? Lincoln would stand there and say, my point is, if we don't fight for what we have, if you listen to that jackass up there, meaning Wesley, then you won't last long. And that is just the honest truth. A random girl in the crowd would ask, so what are you asking from us? Lincoln says, I'm asking you to protect your loved ones, to keep what you have, to stand by your families and fight for each other and defend this place against the evil that's out there. Everyone would look at Lincoln, and Lincoln would say, because we've got a problem on our hands. One hour later. Lincoln and Haley have decided to bring Blake over for something to eat. We see Blake is eating very fast, and Lincoln and Haley look at each other with a small smile that they helped someone. Blake would say, "Oh, thank you." And Lincoln would say, "Of course, anytime, man. Now, you might have to stay at our place for the night, just because I'm not in the mood to handle Wesley tonight. But I promise tomorrow I'll go and I'll have a little word with him about you getting your own place here." Blake would say, "Huh, so you're not in charge here?" Lincoln would say, "Nope." Blake says, "Huh, because I was already assuming you were already leading this place." Lincoln says, "No, that's not me. That's the guy Wesley people talk about." Blake says, "Well, the way I see it, you're the one that'll be leading these people through this mess against the Vipers." Lincoln says, "The Vipers?" Blake says, "That group at the factory. That's what they call themselves." Lincoln then says, "I'm gonna go talk to Tom." Haley says, "But he might be out for the night." Lincoln says, "His lights are on. He ain't asleep." Lincoln then walks out of the house. Blake says to Haley, "I really appreciate the soup." Haley says, "Thanks. I was a chef before." Blake laughs and says, "I can tell." Haley asks, "So you and your friend?" Blake says, "Joel." Haley says, "Right. So did you and Joel come from anywhere?" Blake is kind of hesitant, but he says, "Me and Joel come from a camp. Our new leader sent us on a mission to find out information about this group. That's how I got to meet your husband. We were both held up by these people and both escaped together. Your husband is a good man." Haley would say, "Yeah, he is." Blake would say in a scared voice, "Man, our leader's gonna be pissed once I show up with no Joel." Haley says, "Either way, I'm sure your leader will be more understanding than Wesley." Haley starts walking away and Blake says, "Man, I just hope Dave understands." Haley turns around with a shocked look on her face. Chris is putting a knife through the skull of his dead men in the factory that got killed during the fight. He pulls the knife through the last dead man, and Chris looks at his men and says, "Gary, send him to me." Chris is sitting in his office. Gary would walk in and he says, "You wanted to see me?" Chris says, "Yes, have a seat."
Your time has come.
Gary sits down and Chris says, "I left here for a couple of days to go deal with some things out there.
Can't tell hell from the sun.
I left you in charge of this place and I come back and I find 10 of my men are dead." Gary says in a panicked voice, "I am so sorry, boss. These new people are a lot more difficult to take down than you might think. I mean, this man named Lincoln isn't like any of the other threats we faced. This one's different." Chris would say, "What do you mean?" Chris says, "I'm saying this man is going to kill more of us if we don't stop him." As we hear Chris giving his speech, we see the suburban estates. They're all thinking they're safe. They're all thinking they've won. But what they don't realize is that they have started something that we will finish for them. Gary would look confused, and Chris, with a small smirk, looks over at Gary and say, "You want to pay back for the hell you raised?" Gary says, "Please, boss, I'll do anything." Chris says, "Okay, find this Lincoln. I want his head delivered to me by the end of the day tomorrow. And if you die during the process, I won't give a shit." Gary would ask, "What about the rest of the residents?" Chris says, once their leader falls and we get a little bit of blood on the blade, we will kill every sorry son of a bitch in there.
Will you